the members to elect a chair, please?
I would like to propose Councillor Snell as chair, please.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to read through the protocols for the remote hearing. Please, will you only speak to and invite to by the chair? All participating members are to keep their cameras on during the proceedings unless they are having connection issues. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and direct all communications via the chair. Please ensure officers remotely attending that your mics are muted when you are not speaking. That's including members of the public as well. If you are referring to a specific page or picture in the report, please refer to the page number. If you are having technical difficulties, please use the chat function in the Google Meet to alert the meeting. Please do not use the chat functions for putting formal questions to the committee or to make other comments. Any persistent destructive behaviour will result in removal from the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will take over as chair of the meeting. Firstly, agenda item 2, apologies for absence. I have received no apologies for absence. Item 3, does anyone have an interest to declare? Neither me nor Councillor Root are within the ward that's affected by the application we're considering today. So I have no interest to declare. Councillor Root?
No interest to declare, no.
Thank you. So on to item 3, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Now, this has taken a while to approve because they weren't perfect and we asked for them to be rewritten. They are now good enough. They're certainly not of the quality I would prefer, but subject to changes I've asked, spelling changes I've asked that the officers make, i.e. on fair and how you spell lager, they're acceptable for the record and I am happy to approve them at this meeting.
Approved.
Thank you. So we're on then to agenda item 5. This is the licensing subcommittee hearing procedure. And this, in my written agenda, hard copy agenda, is just before the minutes of the meeting on the 1st of December. We've done appointment of chair and introduction. What we need to do is, well, let me just make a bit more of an introduction. Firstly, all the temporary event notices that were added at the very last minute to this agenda have actually been resolved. They've either been withdrawn or agreement has been reached with officers. So we are not considering any temporary event notices, which means that the only thing we're considering today are the premises on Burnham Street. So there's a single item on this agenda. I'll run through the hearings and we'll try and stick strictly to that because I think this could be quite a controversial decision, and so we need to keep it in some sort of order just to be fair to everybody. First of all, we need to establish the identity of those taking part. So I'm going to introduce Councillor Snell, myself, chairing, Councillor Root, the second councillor on this meeting. 2 councillors is adequate quorum under our standing orders. If we then go round the various officers, which shall I start with? I'll start with you, Suba, if I can.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Subhash Ramana, Principal Licensing Officer.
Thank you. And Jessica, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jessica Feeney and I'm the Government Services Officer.
Thank you. And in terms of admin legal support, perhaps you, Amanda, can introduce yourself. You need to put your mic on.
Sorry, apologies. Good afternoon. My name is Amanda North. I'm a solicitor from Legal Services. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not going to ask Mario to introduce himself. He is our supporting IT officer at important meetings like this. He sits there in the background. If any of you struggle to hear, please, or anything goes wrong with the IT, please put it in the chat function and he will come to the rescue. Okay, so that's what he's doing here. Now, let's go through in order. So we'll finish off the council officers first. David Tuitt, can you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, I'm David Tuitt. I'm Team Leader for Licensing and Technical Support.
Thank you very much. And then perhaps the applicant can introduce themselves and tell us who's going to be speaking on your behalf.
I'm Harley Gray, representing Shiva Limited. I'm also here with Russell Gray from Shiva Limited.
And who is going to do the presentation to this committee?
I shall do the opening presentation.
But Mr. Gray is there to help answer any questions we may have, yes?
Correct.
And possibly correct on any matters that are more my domain than my son's Harley's. There's a division of responsibility in relation to that site, some aspects of which I'm more familiar with.
Lovely, thank you for that explanation. We know where we are. And then in terms of other persons or objectors, I've got various names up here. If you look at this procedure, you get 5 minutes, but obviously you need to decide amongst yourselves who's going to do the presentation, how you're going to split it up. So could you please identify yourselves if you have been, are amongst the objectors, and say who is going to speak on your behalf. Thank you. That's anyone, just loosen up your mic so you can introduce yourselves, yeah? Sorry, Kevin, I think you might be trying to speak to us, but you're not coming through at the moment. Can you unmute your mic, please?
Yeah, my name's Kevin Flood, and I did put in a comment to the planning permission, and I've got an opinion on it. I'm not sure whether I'm an objector or whether or not, but I've certainly got. I was about 2 minutes. 1 minute. I would want to talk about what I think.
Okay. The point. I mean, there are a number of objections to this application. Very often, live objections are very powerful and persuade us to take a particular decision. We will consider the written objections. We've read them all, but it is much better if there are people here who can address the issues. You're on last, basically, after the applicant has made his pitch and the officers have raised their concerns. So it would be good. I don't know if you can contact each other, because I'm assuming, Kevin, there's you. I've got Ravi Bhaskaran. Is that correct?
Ravi is from Shiva Limited.
Okay, you're Shiva Limited. Okay, sorry, I didn't understand that. So, Kevin, seems to me like you are the sole person from that long list of objectors we've had. So you can either get onto your friends and get them here, or it looks like you've got your full 5 minutes. So listen to what you said and then pick it up at the end. Okay.
Councillor Snell, we've got Dushyant Desai. I'm not sure who that is. Another person in the meeting.
Sorry.
I believe the supporter.
Just gone. Okay, they've just left anyway, so we don't have them anymore.
Okay, so we've got. It seems like several people accompanying the applicant, but at the moment only one of the objectors. Amanda, would you like to advise us legally on what we should do next?
No, it's just a point to say that I think there were only going to be a total of 3 other persons attending today, so it wasn't going to be more than that. I'm not sure if they will attend as the meeting progresses.
Okay, there's other people trying to get in. If they turn up, I will ask for other persons when they arrive. Lovely. Okay, so we're going through the procedure. I've introduced everyone. We all know who we are. We all know what we're going to do this afternoon, I hope. I think I don't need anything from you, Amanda. Make it quite clear that throughout the meeting, myself and Councillor Root will be able to seek clarification, but generally we'll wait till someone's done a full presentation and then clarify exactly what they're saying. I think we're ready to start. I think I can ask Suba to outline the report before us this afternoon. Thank you very much, Suba.
Thank you, Chair. Licensing service are in receipt of an application for a premises license under Section 70 of the Licensing Act 2003 for Brunswick and Columbia Wharf, 53 to 55 Laburnum Street for recorded music and to authorize the supply of alcohol for consumption on the premises as stated in the agenda. The premises was granted previously for a time-limited premises license on the 5th of July 2019, and it was expired on the 5th of July 2021. The police have withdrawn their objection based on agreed conditions on their time-limited premises license and proposed new condition. Representation remains from licensing and other persons. I have nothing else to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any clarification required there, Councillor Root? Great. Okay, so we're over to the applicant. I'm going to come back with some specific questions, but first of all, your confirmation that, as the police say, you've agreed to some of the licence conditions they wanted, which is the basis upon which they've withdrawn their representation. But you've got your 5 minutes now to make out the case. Don't feel you have to cover everything. We're going to have a discussion at the end. We'll just try and keep to the facts at this stage of the hearing. So I think, Mr. Gray, you were going to do this for us?
Yes, that's correct. It is correct. I met with the police on Friday, and we've been through the activities that will occur at the site, and they are confident that the licensable objectives won't be affected. We have added a condition to the very long list of conditions that we have, which they are happy with. I am also happy with that. Essentially, the most important thing in support of this case is that this license is virtually identical to the previous license, which was granted and has been in effect for the last 2 years. We are not really asking for anything other than that, apart from it's not time limited. Well, we are also withdrawing the cinema licensing conditions which are on it, which, given that the cinema no longer exists on the roof, is no longer really needed. That was done via Bluetooth headphones anyway, so there was never any danger of any complaints through the cinema via Bluetooth headphones. Essentially, the premises and its activities will remain the same as it's always has done. We will not. We are not looking to change anything. We haven't for the last 10 years exceeded our statutory entitlement of temporary event notices. It's just that apart from being entitled to a premises license, it makes it a lot easier if we don't have to apply each and every time for a 10 when we want to do small charitable events. Essentially, it is what it was before when we're not changing anything. I believe that a lot of the objectors sort of worked themselves up into a bit of a frenzy, assuming that there was some big change to the workings of the premises and what was going to happen. But it is no more than a continuation of our previous license, which lapsed.
Mr. Gray, can I just ask, I think you're assuming knowledge from us that we don't have. And so you will have to set out to us exactly what you're doing at the moment. There's no point in telling us it won't change. We need a clear picture of exactly what you want this license for. We would not put unnecessary restraints in your way, but in granting a permanent license, we will be minded putting conditions that support you in your activities if we feel they are okay, but they will ensure that the premises cannot then be used for different uses to those that you propose. So can you just say exactly what you are proposing to do?
Sure. The premises is probably best described as a test bed. So it doesn't. It has two angles to it. It's occupied by Antipavilion, the charity, which is an architectural charity which hosts probably half a dozen events a year to support the activities of the charity, and then it also acts for the rest of the time when it's not being used by the charity as a test bed, which allow people and brands and communities to come in and propose concepts that may or may not be licensable. That's essentially what the space does. It's a sort of experimental space. It might be theatre one day, it might be a food event or a fashion event another day. It never really has a thing use. That's what it's been for the last 10 years, and it intends to be that ongoing. There is no intention to start a club or a bar or a daily activity, a daily licensable activity. So I understand that makes it a little bit difficult to condition, because conditioning something that is not uniform in its activity is quite difficult. The conditions that we built up from the last license are not a million miles from where I would be happy to settle.
Okay, well, on that one, if I refer you to 9.1 in the report, sorry, clause 9.1, I'm looking for it now. Just before your application in the formal papers, we are told 9 reasons for officer observations. The police have proposed amended condition 56 and 57 for 35 and 46. Basically, they cover exactly the same ground, but it's slightly different wording. Can we assume that you're happy with that? That's the police's preferred wording instead of what was originally for you.
Yes, the police I've spoken to in fair depth, and their conditions I'm happy with.
Okay, because that wasn't mentioned when they withdrew their objection. Can I just ask, yeah, this is still clarification. I don't want to get into a discussion.
Sure.
Take us through the history. Why was your previous premises license time limited? There's normally special circumstances when we give a time limit. Did we think the site was up for redevelopment or something? What was the story?
No, essentially it was time limited because it was an application made specifically for a project in the annual competition for Anti-Pavilion. That project was a temporary structure and was intended to be removed at some point, and therefore the license was not going to be required anymore. So it became apparent that during the time while the premises was licensed, it was very useful to have one. It did lapse because that was the nature of how it was set up, but now it would be beneficial to have an ongoing license.
Okay, just to get one other item out of the way, David Tuitt is going to tell us this, and the other people on this call. He's going to make sure we know this, but my understanding is that generally the hours that you're now applying for are core hours, what we would generally look kindly on. The only thing that I understand is inconsistent at the moment is we don't really like outside activities after 10 o'clock at night. I mean, clearly you can always put in a 10 to change that basic hours, but would you be happy if we limited the hours of activity outside till 10 p.m?
That's no problem. I believe that's on the previous conditions anyway.
Sorry if I've missed that. Okay. Anything else, Councillor Root? Sorry, I hope I haven't missed anything.
The only thing I wonder, as with lots of these sorts of licenses, if we were to grant this license to you and you're wanting to use it only on an occasional basis in line with the other work that you do, but if you were to pack up and sell your business to somebody else, they could presumably, if we grant this license, open every day of the week in core hours as essentially some kind of a bar if they wanted to. Is that? I'm just seeking clarification really on that.
Well, I can probably help you with that. So my family's owned the property since I was 8 years old. I've been there, been going there since I was 8 years old. I'm now 35. There's no intention to sell it, and if there ever was any intention to do anything with it, it would be developed into residential accommodation. So I will be the only operator that ever exists there.
Okay. I mean, I'm not quite sure that that quite answers the question, because in a sense the question is a theoretical one rather than asking you for your future intentions about the business, really.
Well, I mean,
Circumstances do change, obviously.
I guess if it wasn't being operated as it is now, then it would be developed. So
yeah.
If it wasn't being operated now by me,
what I need to do. Perhaps it's good to hear what your intentions are, and perhaps I need to ask the question for clarification from Mr. Tuitt or somebody else on the other side of things, who's better able to describe the theoretical, if you like, significance of this application.
Well,
may I come in? May I come in on that point?
Before you do, can I just in a way supplement what Penny has said? So, license without a time limit is a valuable asset with a property, even if it's about you selling on. And as I say, we can't unreasonably restrict activities that contribute to Hackney, but you could sell on, it could get redeveloped, but within that redevelopment, it is more difficult for us to resist a new license, albeit for a continuous bar, etc., within the hours that you've already got. It would be very difficult for us to resist that if such a license already existed. So the point that I was going to add into this is, you're talking about an occasional activity. What you seem to be talking about is you don't want the hassle of going for tens. You do want the capability to put on events that are licensable. And so the question is, could we add a condition that you only have the license for events, or that the license applied for a maximum of 50 days a year? Would either of those be acceptable? Because that would then address the concerns that Councillor Root has raised.
Not really, because one of the things that we did do last year, which was actually a particular hit with all of our neighbours, was a rooftop sort of restaurant barbecue. That was one thing that all of our neighbours loved. Everyone seemed to come, and I've had a lot of requests for it to happen again. It's a summertime thing. It probably happened. That one actually happened for 28 days or just under. But it would be nice for it to happen a little bit longer. So I feel like that would be potentially limiting the potential future activities a bit too much. I believe.
Could I ask another?
I believe Russell Gray has something to say on this.
Let's Mr. Gray, Mr. Gray the elder. Let him have his say. Yes.
Well, actually, it was on the slightly different point that Penny made, which was to do with transferability. And I believe that as a matter of course, it's necessary to make an application for a new owner to assume a license that already exists. And so it seems to me, as a matter of common sense and thereby obvious provision in the law, that where the change of operator is accompanied by a change of kind of intent, that could be resisted. So if only on the basis of the occasional use were this license granted, it doesn't seem to me impossible that exactly the same constraint applies to somebody who's applying for a transfer. I mean, logically, a transfer should be subject to precisely the same restraints. So I don't think that that's something that is not readily achievable in law. Then, sorry, we've just lost the screen here. So I presume you can still see me, even though we're...
Yeah, we can still see you.
We could.
We could. Can you hear us, Mr. Gray?
And hear you now.
Good. We can't.
We can't hear you again. You've changed position on our screen, but we're not
yeah,
confused.
we've
You
got
can't fox us that way.
we've got a reconfiguration on ours too, but we also have an echo.
Can I just ask another question, really, which is,
Councillor Root.
sorry, I mean, I take on board that what you're saying is you've got no intention of changing the use of the premise at the moment, but in a sense, we have to future-proof whatever we give you, and you know, who knows what might happen tomorrow. We might have a terrible inflationary run the way things are looking, and you might have to reconsider. If that were the case, you might want to reconsider how you use the building, particularly if you've got a license which allows you to do certain things. So my other question then is, if you don't like the conditions that Councillor Snell has suggested, linked to either 50 days or to events, I wonder whether you actually need a license which goes to the full extent of the core hours. So if you were to finish, let's say, an hour or half an hour before core hours, that would make your business much less, your premise much less attractive to somebody who wanted to come in and run a bar there. I don't know how you would feel about trimming the hours back, perhaps by an hour or half an hour from the core hours that you're currently applying for.
That would definitely be a problem for us, but you have to be reassured that there is absolutely no chance of anyone else running anything there apart from me or my family. It just will not happen. The site will be.
Sorry, can I just intervene here? The point is, you know, me in particular, I've been on this committee for a good long time. The advice that we get, we have regular training sessions with officers. The advice that we get is that a transfer of a license, the assumption is that that license is transferred as is. And we would have limited legal grounds to basically demand a full hearing if there was an application for a transfer of the license. And that's why we future-proof them, and it's perfectly legitimate. We do it on every single application we get. And at the moment, you don't seem to be accepting that, but we can't simply, if the person was clearly not a fit and proper person with criminal convictions, etc., then by all means we could say, hey guys, you're not getting this license, but it has to be pretty damn serious before we have those powers. So just to get that absolutely clear.
Fair enough, but I think it's perfectly plain from the constraints and the many conditions that are placed on the license that arose precisely because of the nature of the use intended on the existing license or the recently expired license, that it would not be of any appeal in terms of the kind of...
Mr. Gray, I think I need to pull this because we are getting now into discussion, and that's not really fair when you haven't heard the comments that our responsible authorities are going to make. So if it's okay with you, I'm quite happy to revisit this, but that should be under the discussion phase of the meeting. I think we need to speak to David to it, hear what he's saying as an enforcement officer, and because we're just at clarification at the moment. So Councillor Root, any more clarification required?
No, that's fine for the time being, thanks.
Thank you very much. So we then go on to the stage, the relevant responsible authorities. The police have withdrawn their objection on the basis of agreed changes from the applicant. You are maintaining your objection. Mr. Tuitt, can you please explain why?
It's more just to set out some background, Chair, just in relation to the current premises. And so my representation is in today's agenda, Appendix B2. So I talked about the roof level. I think it's just been agreed that it will be till 10 p.m, which accords with LP6 in the Council's licensing policy. However, I am aware that there are some ongoing planning enforcement issues. And I believe that my colleagues over in the planning service had to take enforcement action to stop the activity that was previously licensed at this site. and those activities that were authorised by that licence, which expired, that time-limited licence. So it's just to bring that really to your attention, and I do think that is something that's a material consideration in this application. Obviously, licensing and planning are two separate regimes, two separate regulatory regimes. I just think in this particular case where planning have had to take action to stop that activity, I do think that's a very important consideration in the determination of this application. So I'll just leave it there for now, Chair, because I can see there's quite a bit to get through.
Well, can I ask for clarification on that? I mean, we know how careful we have to be not to muddle up planning considerations and licensing. In terms of your written submission, what you seem to be suggesting is some of the stuff that has triggered planning intervention could equally be considered a relevant matter for licensing. Now, I'm guessing that is the use of the premises to erect dangerous structures, or have I got that wrong? And therefore that potentially is a public health risk. Is that exactly what you were meaning? And can you put me straight on that? And also Amanda, if I haven't understood exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, so I believe the planning issues did relate also to structures that were erected on the roof. But I'm also believing that it related to the use of the building. So what my colleagues in planning have said is that the permission that is authorised out there is for artist studios rather than an event space, and I think it was the event space type activities which they had to take enforcement action for.
Thank you, but we're not going to consider that in our decision today. That is relevant background. We'll address it with an informative, but we can, I'm suggesting, consider the issue of erection of dangerous structures that that endangered the public safety of people using the venue. Yes, the public health of people using the venue.
Yeah, public safety is of course one of the 4 licensing objectives. That's right.
Okay, I think we've got that clear. Councillor Root, any questions for David?
I don't think so. No, I think that's pretty clear.
Actually, I'm going to ask another one as well. Have I understood your submission correctly, David, that you've had no complaints to the licensing service, but there are a number of references to environmental protection having concerns in the environmental protection, i.e. the noise service, subjected to a temporary event notice after the old license expired? And am I right to understand that there have been complaints from neighbours about noise nuisance and the behaviour of people using the venue in the street outside?
Not to licensing. So licensing service, in our records, we've not received any complaints. So I did state that in the representation. I think it was in the police representation they talked about an objection to a temporary event notice. But from a licensing point of view, the licensing service haven't received any complaints. After that previous license, the license that's expired during the time that license was in effect.
And are you aware of any complaints to environmental protection? That's really what I'm asking.
I would have to check that. I'm not entirely sure if there have been complaints received by environmental protection. I don't know.
It would help if they made representations if they do have concerns. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Tuitt. Should we move on? I think we're now at step 5, which is basically where we're asking other persons, i.e. the objectors to this application, to tell us why they're objecting and say if anything they've heard so far has reassured them that we should allow this this license to be granted. And where's he gone? Somewhere on my screen. We had one person. Are you happy to give us a go at this, Kevin? You've got 5 minutes if you want it.
Okay, right. I've lost my voice, but I'll do my best. Well, first of all, I would like to say that, yeah, to some extent, my mind has been changed by a conversation with Harley today and what you're saying. But I'll just express what my concerns were, because you've also expressed some of them, which is my concern is the theoretical one, that the license allows it to turn the place into a bar or a pub. So that was my entire concern, that I did not want to have a noisy bar or pub next door. The reason I was particularly worried about that was, first of all, just because it's a neighborhood residential area. And secondly, because the premises occasionally have events which are parties with a very, very loud music system with a bass. Now, I live in the building next door to them, and it's impossible to sleep when those basses are going, and they go on when there have been parties until 2 or later than 2. And I've complained to Harley about this at the time, and I've also got an email from one of my neighbours who's also says that she has complained. I don't know who to, but she's complained about the noise. So occasionally there have been these events, statutory events, I think Harley uses that word, where the noise levels have been just impossible to sleep. Now, so that was my issue. So I don't want a pub next door, and I'm particularly worried about having a pub bar next door, because if they're going to use music, which was in the license, this would be, I would have to move. It would destroy my life here, I think. Now, Harley has made me feel less worried about it, as you have, because but what I would say is that these events, which have been so noisy, only happen every so often. And if they happened all the time, it would be terrible. But if they happen once every 2 months, which is what they were happening, I don't mind that much. But it's annoying on that particular day. So that level of noise worries me. And also, I would say in the last 2 years, I think there's been less of those really noisy parties. So I think the issues I had really relate to actually at least 18 months and more before, and it was occasional annoyance. But the fear that occasional annoyance could become every week annoyance is very, very, very worrying. I'm very happy with Harley telling me that he wants to do what he has been doing over the last couple of years, because I support most of the events he does, and I think they do a good job and an interesting job there. So if it is going to be like it has been for the last 2 years, I have no problem. But I do have the problem of the theoretical issue that you were talking about. So if something could be arranged to sort of make sure that there's no way of wriggling out or changing ownership and then it becoming a pub bar, I'd be very happy with some arrangement which could just mean that we can be sure that what Harley said, what he's done over the last couple of years is not a problem. So the problems I had with the loud bass of the music, don't want a pub. Thirdly, a fear that if they had events on the roof, that would give people when they're drunk, they shout a lot. So I was worried about roof noise. So those are my fears. But as I said, I support a lot of the work that Harley does, and I think it's very, very interesting. Now, so if you can find a way of stopping it becoming a bar or pub potential, I personally would be happy as it is. I've just got an email from one of my friends, which I'll just say, but this is her opinion, not mine. But it just gives you an idea of. I think she probably put something in, but I'm just going to say it. She said she didn't like the obstructive sculptures. Now, our garden is overlooked by the sculptures, and they haven't worried me, but they do probably cut the light down a little bit. The constant noise, rubbish often left outside after an event, and the clear breach of lockdown rules when the rest of the country were under strict stay-at-home instructions. And as I said, I don't entirely. I mean, I haven't found a huge amount of. I haven't heard constant noise, but she's in the flat above me. But anyway, so I just wanted to represent what she said. But and I don't represent anybody else other than myself, and I hope I've made it clear that that's my issue. It's the danger of it becoming a pub or having those loud music events too often. I think most of us are worried by that.
Thank you very much. If I can say, Mr. Flood, you're being very, very amenable as a neighbour there. Clearly, any noise nuisance is that has that impact on your house is against the law and should not be allowed by any licence. The current proposal is condition 34. No noise shall emanate from the premises nor vibration be transmitted through the structure of the premises which gives rise to a nuisance. Now, what potentially we could do, and I'll invite Mr. Pewitt to comment on this in a minute, is actually suggest that a noise limiting advice agreed with the council might give you more protection, since what you're telling us is that that proposed condition has already been broken. The comments from your neighbour, if I can just go through them quickly, the obstructive sculptures are not really a material condition for this committee. We can worry about public safety. That's really a planning issue, so that will need to be taken up with them. In terms of the breach of COVID regulations, that allegation is new to us. And if COVID, that would be a material consideration here, but we can't really do it when it's being reported in this fashion. I mean, that needs to be reported to licensing, and they will enforce as they have done throughout the lockdown period. What that leaves is the issue of rubbish and stuff left on the street. Again, I haven't actually found the conditions we've got in there to address that, but a lot of the concerns that we've heard in the written submissions from your friends and neighbours are about proper dispersal policies. And again, we could look at conditions that might address that, so people aren't milling around in the street outside. Is that okay? I'm giving an instant response to that and trying to say what me and Penny can take into consideration. Is that fair enough in your view?
If you're asking me, are you asking me?
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah, seems fair enough. And the COVID issues, I don't know the issues behind that. It's probably just that there were events going on and people going in and out. But so I can't talk to the veracity of that. They always seem to be fairly responsible. But I would also like to suggest to Harley and his father, who's nice to see his father, I don't think I've ever met, is that it would be great if they sort of, kept us a little bit more informed, because, a lot of things he said, I didn't know there were picnics on the roof, for example. Anyway, so if they
Thank you. Councillor Root, any further clarification before we go into open discussion?
Sorry, having a bit of trouble unmuting myself. I suppose I was just going to ask, one of the things that's come up in the letters is that people seem to feel, residents nearby seem to feel that that the applicants sort of make the rules up themselves and abide by their own rules. There's at least one letter in there which says it doesn't really matter what restrictions you put on there, they'll do whatever they want anyway. I just wondered, is that, what's your observation on that?
My observation, there's a little bit of arrogance, I would say. As I said, I really support the art stuff they've done is absolutely really, really great. But there's just been a couple of times when I felt that there was a feeling that if we were objecting to noise, we were sort of, this is Hackney. Of course, there's going to be noise. What are you doing complaining about noise because you live in Hackney? And also there was this also suggestion, which came with the email from the council, saying that if we didn't attend, therefore the council should be noting that the complainers had not attended. And I said, well, I can't attend because I'm out of the country. You can't make any assumption on the reason I'm not attending. It's arrogant to sort of, and so there's a slight bit of annoyance at authority and neighbours, a bit of NIMBYism. And I would just like to say to them that I think a lot of us really admire the work they do. And I think it's great, really good stuff on the stuff they did on the canal. And we're neighbours who, a lot of people here have got young children, and it is a worrying thing. If you're worried about noise, you can't sleep at night. It makes you change your attitude to the place you live in. And so that's.
Could I ask you another question then, which is that, and as far as I'm aware, I haven't come across any conditions linked in here suggesting that there be some kind of regular consultation with neighbours. Partly, I think, because normally that kind of condition is linked to pubs and clubs who are going to be operating on a daily basis. But I just wonder, would you welcome a condition which asked the organisation to reach out, on a regular basis, which may only be a year or whatever, to consult with neighbours about how things are going? Is that the kind of condition you'd welcome?
Well, I think that'd be brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can I point out that there is such a condition?
Oh, is there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to mention that. I think we could probably move to a discussion phase now, unless there's any more clarification. And I was going to start off with the conditions that are here in the proposed approval. Amanda, can you come in and give us some legal advice?
Oh, sorry. I was only coming in to just clarify, following the applicant saying that they wanted to remove the conditions relating to the cinema, is it 51 and 57 that they agree to be deleted from the conditions? Sorry, 52 and 57, sorry.
Sorry, we've lost you again.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute, somehow uncontrolled by me. There seems to have been a misunderstanding as between my son and myself on that one. I had suggested it was unnecessary because there'd only been half a dozen cinema showings on Bluetooth headsets that were specifically linked to one of the artworks where there, as a proof of concept, it did a few performances. This was for like less than a month in 2019. And so it was part of the original concept that silent film showings could take place on the roof. Unless they're deemed to be offensive, I would prefer that they remain in, because my son is now telling me it's conceivable that there could be some occasion where that remains useful. If it was a real sticking point, they could come out. But actually, although they were in there purely to cater for a handful of showings, specifically related to a particular winning anti-pavilion entry, Harley tells me he thinks it would be a useful thing to have. It wouldn't alter, and it would be just as restricted as it is here. And I don't believe anybody had any problem with those Bluetooth headset shown films, because they involve no noise at all, of course. So unless it's a sticking point, I think leaving the license exactly as it is would be preferable. Can I, at the same time, pick up a couple?
Can I just say, I don't think we have a problem with that. Thank you for the suggestion, Amanda. But the issue of cinema-related noise has not been raised. There's an issue about people being out late and making a lot of noise, which hopefully we're addressing by limiting the outside use till 10 o'clock at night. Yes, Mr. Gray, we are now entering into a discussion phase, and I want to make a few points to set the scene. But Mr. Gray, certainly come up with something quickly.
A couple of the points that, while I remember them, well, one, you actually referred to dangerous structures. I have sat through now 8 days of public inquiry, which is how this planning issue is to be resolved. And there are that's what's known as a ground A appeal in respect the capacity of that public inquiry to grant planning permission. There seems to be some misunderstanding about what's at issue in that, and dangerous structures are no part of any aspect of that planning issue. So that's simply, I don't know how it's come about that anybody has believed that there's anything, but it's no part of the planning and it's no part of any other issue. Of course, if there was anything,
it has been raised by some of the objectors, and so thank you for that clarification. Without direct confirmation from a planning officer, that will not form part of our decision. Thank you.
Okay, and one other observation I would make is that it used to be the case when, for most of the time that I owned that building, that there was one pub known as the Overdraft that is more or less directly or diagonally opposite the building across the canal, that of course operated to normal pub hours. And there was the Acorn pub about 200 meters at most in the opposite direction, and hence, as it were, diametrically opposite the premises from the Overdraft. Both of those pubs have now been lost to the community as a result of planning decisions that have allowed them to be demolished to give way for residential use. In the circumstances, it does seem a little kind of unreasonable of residents to expect that the silence that they've come to enjoy as a result of the disappearance of two pubs is completely undisturbed. Where I live, for example, we're regularly kept up by numerous premises opposite us that are open till 2 and 3 in the morning. This really doesn't represent, and it is back to, well, it's Hackney, it's a community, it has various uses, the residents have various kind of requirements and tastes, and to have the odd pub in the area.
Okay, can I just bring this to a close? I want to go on to the discussion, and I want to set the terms of discussion. I can see Mr. Flood has raised a hand, and I'm going to be with you when I've introduced what's the discussion phase. What we are doing here is getting into the discussion phase, and I don't want to do that. If I can just say to you, it is a relevant consideration for us to look at the fact that there's been a loss of licensed premises in the area, which therefore reduces the likelihood of significant impact, the overall likelihood. It is not a relevant consideration for us, and I could get legal advice on this, but I know the law well enough. It is not relevant to say, if you live in a place like this, you must be expected to kept awake at night. That, I'm afraid, is not what the law says, and this committee will be guided by the law. And so I'm sorry, we do not expect this license, if granted, to cause any nuisance to your neighbours. That is breaking the law, and we really don't want to have to take enforcement action. Now, I'm just going to do a quick sum up to try and pull some things together, because it does seem to me that some people have not necessarily understood what's in this recommendation before us. So first of all, we were informed as committee members of the letter from Mr. Flood, not Mr. Flood, the letter from the applicant saying, if you can't be bothered to turn up for the meeting, how do you expect me to take any notice of you, or words to that effect? I mean, sorry, that's silly. Objectors can be a nuisance, but if you're a licensee, we expect you to bend over backwards and work with them. And what I would point out is in the new condition, it says it is the number 55, it is the responsibility of the premises license holder and or its management to organise and hold quarterly meetings with the local residents, which is to take place in the premises, with the council's licensing service also being invited to these meetings. Now, that is there as a condition already, and that is would seem to address the concerns. And obviously, you have to cooperate, even if you think people are being unfair. The other things that I would bring to people's attention: no glass receptacles or alcohol containers are to be taken from the ground floor to the first floor roof terrace after 10 o'clock. A written dispersal policy shall be submitted to and be approved by the licensing service and environment. This is conditions 52 and 53. The written copy of the dispersal policy shall be kept on the premises and be made available to police and other authorised officers on request. And somewhere here, I'll keep going. Condition 50, the licensee shall instruct members of staff to make regular checks of the area immediately outside the premises and remove any litter, bottles and glass is emanating from the premises. When female only staff working, checks must be made during daylight hours and one check first thing in the morning at 8 o'clock. And then the key thing, Mr. Flood, and for the people who are objecting, is condition number 45. Only members of the public who hold a ticket or pass, whether this be a physical ticket, hand stamp, wristband, or admitted on a sign-in basis for a performance or exhibition, shall be admitted into the building. So if this became a general licensed premises like the two pubs that were mentioned, the Acorn and the Overdraft, then that would be in contravention to that condition, and that would have to be renegotiated with the council's licensing department. So I think there's a degree of reassurance there. I would oh yes, and I'd already referred to the noise emanating from the premises, and I am minded to look for a tougher condition on that, I've got to be honest, given the problems that we know have already been experienced by neighbours. So I am looking to perhaps have a noise limiter installed. But with that introduction, let's get into a full discussion. Mr. Flood, sorry to keep you waiting, but I hope that's been useful background.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Gray Senior, I think, illustrated what I was saying when there's a touch of arrogance in there. And I'd just like to question, what is the relevant? He says he doesn't want to create a pub, and then he then refers to two pubs as a parallel. So I don't understand that. And just as a matter of fact, if you actually look at the pub, the Acorn, which I know where it was, only the point about it is nowhere near here in terms of noise or people wondering. It's you know it's just not in this area. It's not an issue for the people, residential people in this area around it. While number 55 and 53 is next door to us. That's why we feel that way. And trying to talk about two other parallel past pubs over there is kind of nonsense and disregard.
I get your message. Okay, let's move on. Sorry, Mr. Flood, please. You have more to say, I think.
No. That was all. I think great. If some sound limiting would reassure most people, I think.
Thank you. Your hand is still up. That's a lazy hand. I think it needs to be brought down. Okay, come on. Let's kick off the discussion. I mean, Penny and I both try and be fairly open about where we're coming from in this open part of the meeting to make sure that if anyone has any concerns or any defence they want to raise, that they can do so. My initial take on this, Councillor Root, is that we have it limited, and in particular it is limited to events. I am minded to think about extra noise controls, and what I do believe is that the need to agree a dispersal policy with licensing and the need to clean up outside afterwards should go to address some of the concerns that we've had raised by the other persons. What are your thoughts on this, and have you got any questions you want to put into the meeting?
I suppose I've got one question, which was a little bit around the consultation. Was there any in the previous license that we're just going into now? Was there any requirement to consult with neighbours at all? And did you consult with neighbours, I suppose, is my question. Because it seems to me that if you're going to have you've got a reasonably good relationship with your neighbours, I suppose, you know, one thing that the neighbours need to bear in mind is that if you have this license and you do want to have parties until 3 o'clock in the morning from time to time, there's nothing to stop you applying for a TENS license to do that. So it's not a guarantee that loud parties into the middle of the night won't be applied for. And so I suppose that to my mind plays to some extent into the condition that we're talking about with the noise limiter. I think that the noise limiter would probably be a good idea. I also feel, I mean, I even though there's an events condition here, I still feel that, you know, particularly, I suppose, given the location that you're in, that you do find yourself with an ongoing license for core hours in this location, that it is quite an attractive business proposition for somebody. And I'm still wondering if there's any way that we couldn't agree upon between us a condition that you would be willing to take on board, which would mean that it couldn't really be turned into that sort of regular drinking establishment on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis. We discussed earlier on, didn't we? We discussed a few possible options. Councillor Snell suggested a 50-day limit. I mean, maybe we could look at a larger day limit that might fit in better with the numbers of events that you're planning on having, but would mean that, you know, certainly it wouldn't be possible to run the place on as an events location throughout the year. Is that something you might consider?
Mr. Gray.
May I just read the conditions that I think, Penny, you might have overlooked. Condition 11 in the existing license that says alcohol shall be served as an ancillary to cultural, artistic, creative and community events. This premises shall not be operated as a club or bar. So the idea that it's going to be attractive to a new owner because it offers the opportunity of opening a nightclub or a bar is already addressed and was, of course, very much part of the consideration of the licensing committee last time round. Then there's condition 33. The sale of alcohol at the premises shall at all times be ancillary to the provision of regulated entertainment and shall only be to members of the public holding a ticket or pass, whether this be a physical ticket, hand stamp, wristband, etc., for a performance or exhibition with no ticket being sold at the door. So we already have two conditions that clearly eliminate the danger that you're highlighting. Then only members of the public who hold, sorry, this is condition 45, only members of the public who hold a ticket or pass, whether this be a physical ticket, hand stamp, wristband, or admitted on a sign-in basis for a performance or exhibition shall be admitted into the building. It's already conditioned to the point where the perceived threat of it being converted to a regular pub or a club is exhaustively conditioned out.
It is.
Thank you very much.
I can see that. I suppose it would probably take quite a lot of organisation to organise an event on a daily basis throughout the year. But with this licence, if you were capable of doing that, you could do something every day, couldn't you?
Can I also add that since our license was granted, that a very different approach to the premises has been taken. We have become obviously conditioned heavily with everything that was placed in the last license. We completely changed our approach and the number of events and how we held those events. And I believe even Kevin himself said that the noise and disturbance occurred before our license was granted. So really the last 2 years has been us really trying to get along with our neighbors. I do have WhatsApp groups with neighbors in what you asked before. I do consult with them. Everyone has my personal phone number. I don't believe that we should be conditioned any further than we already are. And just by the very nature of that license and the conditions, the whole thing has changed. So a lot of Kevin's worries in particular have been from previous from the premises previous to its license, when we had only 12 events a year. Those had to be very large events that went on late, and that was all we could do. Now we can do a lot of smaller events. It's very they don't disturb the neighbors. They close earlier. They have very much fewer numbers of people, and really, it's conducive to a kind of a cooperative relationship with neighbors that actually a lot of the neighbors really enjoy coming to and use.
Okay, that thank you very much. It is good to have a good discussion, because often things come up in discussion that probably you could sensibly have made in your initial presentation, because I am hearing stuff that is reassuring me. Now, I see, Mr. Flood, that you have your hand up. Before we go there, I think we should be bringing this discussion to a conclusion. Let people be then thinking about what final comments they need to make. To set the scene for that, I would like to ask our licensing officer, who understands the conditions much better than me and Councillor Root. I'd just like to have his advice. So, David, a couple of things. Please reassure us that there is a condition that would more closely control noise emanating from the building, because it's quite clear that noise nuisance has been caused in the past, despite the new condition being exactly the same as was on the old license. So please confirm that condition and the sort of things it would cover. And then the other thing is, it's being argued by the applicant that in fact the controls, and I read out one of them, but in fact Mr. Gray the Elder has now read out a whole lot more, do clearly limit this to an event connected license. And tell us if you think that goes far enough to prevent this. You know, is there anything else we could reasonably do, in your opinion, that could make sure this doesn't just become yet another pub or nightclub? Can you just help us on those two, please? My intention, sorry, to make this completely clear, I'm going to give you, Mr. Flood. I'm going to go to Amanda to make sure that we haven't missed anything that's of legal importance. And then I'm going to move to summing up from all the different parties as set out in the procedure. Obviously, that might change, but that's what I'm thinking at the moment. So take it away, David.
So the condition in relation to noise nuisance, that was the first question. Am I right, Councillor?
Correct.
I'm just looking at the conditions that start on in today's agenda on page 6 of the digital version. I don't see a condition in relation to, for example, noise limitation. I'm not sure if that's something that the applicant had agreed to, or that was even on the previous license. I think it should be clear, though, that, you know, whether there's a condition or not, there are powers to deal with those sorts of issues if they were to arise, whether it be under Licensing Act 2003 or Environmental Protection Act. So the absence of a condition in that respect doesn't necessarily mean that we as an authority wouldn't have powers to deal with that sort of situation were it to arise. But as I say, I don't actually see that a condition's been offered in this application at the moment in relation to a noise limiter.
Okay, the applicants can address that in their summing up. Yes.
And then, and sorry, I was just going to say, in relation to your second question about the type of premises that the premises should remain. I think condition 33 that the applicant has made reference to in relation to physical tickets, etc., sales of tickets only be to members of the public that hold tickets and passes. That's quite a restrictive condition. So that would, you know, prevent sort of walk-ins off the street without some sort of challenge for a person to have to provide some sort of ticket. And then condition 11, going backwards, I think that's carried over from the previous license as well. That talks about alcohol being sold, alcohol being served ancillary to cultural, artistic, creative and community events. Bit of a typo in that condition, but if you are minded to grant, we would carry that over into any license issued.
Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Flood, just to make it quite clear, in previous life I have been environmental health officer and I've been out on noise patrols, etc. The key thing that you and all your neighbours need to understand is it's unacceptable at any time that you should not be able to get to sleep, and you need someone to visit and identify the noise, and then they could take enforcement action against it. That needs to be publicised. You've heard David being basically reassuring about potential change of use. I'm going to give you another chance to come back and sum up your arguments, but from what you've heard, is there anything that we still need to drill down and look at?
Yeah, yeah, a bit worried about depending on environmental control, because you don't hear good things about it around and about the borough. So I would some sort of sound mentioning of the sound thing in the license would be great. The noise would be great. I'm sort of feeling reassured that it can't become a pub or a bar. I'm not. I do think, and I'm also reassured by Holly and his father explaining that they want it to be a cultural and artistic venue, and I'm happy if it does that like the way it used to. But I still think you need to make sure that it can't become a club or a music venue. No, it can't be a pub or a bar because you need a ticket. But there are a load of venues where you can have bands on every night of the week, easily done. And I can't see anything here which will stop it becoming a club or music venue. So some form, if you can take that into account, that would be great. Generally, I support the work they do, but I just said we just worry about the worst case scenario.
We don't do it.
Okay, I would say I'm partly reassured by the argument that we are limiting the numbers, particularly in the areas where they're going to cause nuisance, but you can come back and address that in your summing up if you like. Are we ready? Councillor Root, I'm going to check with Amanda first. Amanda, first. Is there anything
yes.
you feel we should have covered on the legal basis?
There's a couple of questions I've got. I don't know if Mr. Tuitt is going to cover whether or not his he still maintains his objections. I don't know if he's covered that yet, or if he's going to in his closing. So if he could clarify that when he does his closing. And also going back to the conditions that we referred to earlier about condition 57 and 52. My understanding, and Mr. Tuitt or the licensing officer can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is if condition 44 is amended to no outdoor activity after 2200 hours, that means that condition 57 will no longer apply anyway, because the roof area would not be allowed to be used after 2200 hours. Is that correct or not? And that means no alcohol or anything outside after 2200 hours.
Hang on, we've got to be careful here.
Yeah.
What page are you? Hang on, sorry, no, it's okay. There's so many different conditions here. I'll muddle up the old ones and the new ones. Okay, yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
Condition 44, if we amend that to 2200 hours, okay, condition 44. So then look to conditions 57 and 52. How do they then, they can't obviously remain on the license because they no longer will be applicable. Is that right or wrong? I just want to make sure we're clear on that. That's all, in case there's a problem in the future. Because they're saying that I'm not clear really from the representations that have been made whether or not they're planning to use that roofed area after 10 o'clock, and if they're still planning to have those events.
Look, I'm going to be advised by you, Amanda. It would seem to me that if they're not using it, okay, we've got an additional condition that that's not really relevant.
Can I add something there? There's
sorry, let me just finish off the point, because Amanda's our legal expert, so let her say it. It would seem to me, however, that if they did apply subsequently for a temporary event notice to do a late night event, then we might as well have the condition in there, because basically we can say, oh, you run any 10 in line with your license conditions. So although I understand why you're trying to tidy up, Amanda, on condition 52, I don't personally think we have to bother too much about it. And similarly, really, for condition 57, again, it's after 10 o'clock, but having conditions that allow themselves to be applied to temporary event notices doesn't seem to me to be a bad thing. You're gone, tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, I'll leave them as they are, if that's what you prefer. But I was just only worrying about whether or not they contradict each other. That was all. I don't know.
What do you think, Councillor Root? I mean,
I'd say that they don't actually contradict. I think one is superfluous in the current license, but in the situation of a TENS, it wouldn't be. So I would say leave it in, because I don't see the contradiction.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's it. I don't have any other observations.
Thanks, that's very helpful, Amanda. Thanks for keeping us on course. Okay, so we've gone on too long. Lots of discussion, but it's been very useful and reassuring to me. Closing remarks. I'm going to first go to David Tuitt from the Enforcement Authority. I'm then going to Mr. Flood on behalf of the other persons, the objectors. You've made a very good case this afternoon and been very constructive, Mr. Flood. So we really appreciate the fact you've come along today. And then we'll finish off with the applicants, the Greys, and the licensing officer. And then, under this current online way of doing things, we will retire into a private meeting and we will make the decision there, and it will be announced to you in the morning informally, and then it will come out formally in about 5 days' time. So, in that order, first of all, Mr. Tuitt, are you still maintaining your objection in view of the reassurance received, and anything else you need to say?
Yeah, I should just be clear. It's more of a representation than an objection to the grant of a license. So I should just be very clear on that. I think we've heard the assurances from the applicant today, and I think members of the public, any other persons, can be reassured that if problems do arise in the future, we do have powers to tackle them, whether it be under Licensing Act 2003, breaches of conditions, review applications, etc., or Environmental Protection Act, or even our colleagues in planning have enforcement powers as well. So there is that to bear in mind, and members of the public shouldn't think that the grant of the license today is the end of it. It's you know, there are powers to tackle issues if they arise in the future. So I'll just leave it there for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I misrepresented your representation. Okay, so next one on the list. Other persons, that's you, Mr. Flood. Thank you very much for your contribution today. Anything else you want us to take into account?
I hope we can facilitate Harley's and his father's great, wonderful cultural events, and that we can stop the theoretical, hopefully theoretical, possibility of it being used as a pub and a bar, which I think we have, but please also make sure it can't be used as a club or a music venue or restaurant.
We will take that into consideration making our final decision. Thank you very much. We'll check back through the conditions once again. Thank you. Okay, the Grey. Hang on, Amanda, please advise us.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, in view of the fact that local residents are concerned about this, have you, do you think it's appropriate to ask the applicant whether or not they would consider having quarterly meetings or something
That's a condition that's already offered in the application.
That's already in there, yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
No, the quarterly meetings are there, and we would hope that the Greys in good faith will welcome those meetings and use them as a way to engage local residents and get even more support from local residents for the sorts of activities they're talking about. So that's in there. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so I'm over to you guys, Mr. Greys, and have you got anything else you want to tell us?
Essentially, that I'd like you to sort of have it at the front of your mind that that since the granting of the last premises license, I feel that the elevation of the venue has, in the way that it's been run, has been just chalk and cheese to previous. And I feel like particularly Kevin's worries are on the previous way it was run on TENS, which has completely changed nowadays. And not only do we have a license to lose, as David Chewett says, there are powers that can obviously strip us of our license. There is pages and pages of conditions which we oblige and are happy to operate within, that I feel has made it quite a fair license that has allowed the neighbours to kind of at least sleep well and kind of enjoy the premises in the way that it's used. So I feel like the last 2 years has been indicative of how it will be run, and I think it's pretty fair. So yeah, that's all I really have to offer, unless my father has something.
I would only say that in general, this is an exceedingly restrictive license, and it's an exceedingly restrictive license because it's only the intention of the applicants to use it in an exceedingly restricted way. And so really, I think although the restrictions go far beyond what, in my opinion, is ultimately sustainable, should there be a desire to do anything else, because we never have had any intention of going beyond this kind of restricted use. It represents a solution where rather kind of oppressive constraints are actually perfectly agreed by the applicants. I think it might be worth considering what if we hired some fancy licensing barristers to fight out for ourselves. Would look like an exceedingly different license. But that's not what we want. We're here unrepresented, not investing money in men in suits who would assure us of getting far less restricted licenses. Is not what we want. And I would have expected to get some appreciation of that from the neighbours, because there it is in black and white, how restricted our ambitions are in terms of the licensable activities.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. As I say, neighbours can be frustrating. You've lived in that area for a long time. I promise you, your best way ahead is to stop complaining about the neighbours and get on with them. And could I suggest that in this very restrictive licence, if we grant it, you might find some way of putting on events specifically to get to know the neighbours so they can understand the rules you're operating under, and that would hopefully be the start of a more positive relationship in future. But for the time being, we haven't made our decision. I think we've covered everything we need to. Penny, anything left from you? Councillor Root? No?
No, I'm happy, thanks.
So I'm afraid we must now narrow this meeting down to our admin support and our legal advisor. Have we missed anything, Amanda? Are you happy we've covered everything? Great. So thank you all for coming along this afternoon. We do appreciate it. And I hope, Mr. Flood, your friends and neighbours will consider we've addressed their concerns. And I hope that your worst fears don't come true. Well, any of your fears don't come true. Let's be straight about it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.